I was sold at the altar like livestock, and the man who bought me wasn't who anyone thought he was. My name is Clara Hensley, and the day I should have walked down the aisle in white, I stood there in rags while my father auctioned me off to pay his debts. The town laughed. My family looked away. And the stranger who claimed me? They called him a monster. But what happened next in those mountains changed everything I thought I knew about freedom, strength, and what it means to finally be seen. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The chapel smelled like damp wood and old prayers nobody believed in anymore. Clara stood at the front, hands clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white, staring at the cracked floorboards beneath her feet. She couldn't look up, couldn't meet the eyes of the people filling the pews, neighbors, merchants, folks from town who'd come not to witness a wedding, but a spectacle, a transaction. Her father stood beside her, swaying slightly. Edgar Hensley had the look of a man who'd run out of options 3 years ago and had been living on borrowed time ever since. His collar was stained, his jacket too loose on his thinning frame. He kept clearing his throat like he was about to say something important, but nothing ever came out. "Quiet down now," the minister called, though his voice lacked conviction. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and he looked about as comfortable with this situation as Clara felt. The murmuring didn't stop. "Selling his own daughter," someone whispered from the third row. "Desperate times," another voice answered. "Still, it ain't right." Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything except stand here like a piece of furniture waiting to be claimed. But her legs wouldn't move, and her voice had disappeared sometime around dawn when her father had told her what was going to happen today. "You'll marry him," Edgar had said, not looking at her. "It's done. The agreement's made." "Who?" Clara had asked, though part of her already knew the answer didn't matter. "Silas Thornridge." The name had landed like a stone in cold water. Everyone in Graymore knew about Silas Thornridge, the hermit, the healer, the man who lived up in the mountains and only came down when someone was dying and the real doctor had given up. Some said he could cure anything with his herbs and strange knowledge. Others said he was dangerous, that he'd killed a man once, that he talked to things that weren't there. Nobody knew which stories were true, and nobody cared to find out. "He's offering to clear the debt," Edgar had continued, still avoiding her eyes. "All of it. The house, the shop, everything. In exchange for—" He hadn't finished the sentence, hadn't needed to. Now standing in this chapel with her future crumbling around her, Clara finally understood what it meant to be worth nothing. Not to your family, not to your town, not even to yourself. The door at the back of the chapel opened. The whispers died instantly. Clara didn't want to look, but she couldn't help it. Her eyes lifted, drawn by the sudden silence, and she saw him. Silas Thornridge. He wasn't what she expected. Tall? Yes. Taller than most men she'd seen, but not the twisted, haunted figure from the stories. He wore dark, simple clothes that looked well-made but worn, and his hair was longer than was fashionable, tied back with a leather cord. His face was angular, weathered by wind and sun, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains he lived in. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray, sharp, and focused directly on her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. He walked down the aisle slowly, deliberately, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The town baker's wife actually clutched her husband's arm like Silas might suddenly lunge at them. When he reached the front, he didn't acknowledge the minister. Didn't nod at Edgar. He just stood there, 3 feet from Clara, studying her like she was a puzzle he was trying to figure out. "This her?" His voice was low, rough around the edges. Edgar nodded quickly. "Yes, this is Clara, my daughter. She's a good girl, hardworking. She can cook, clean, sew. I didn't ask for a resume." Edgar's mouth snapped shut. Silas's gaze hadn't left Clara's face. She forced herself to meet his eyes, even though every instinct screamed at her to look away. If she was going to be sold, she'd at least face it head on. "Do you know why you're here?" Silas asked her directly. Clara's throat felt like sandpaper. "My father's debts." "And you agreed to this?" She almost laughed. Agreed. Like she'd had a choice. like she'd been given options and weighed them carefully and decided this was the best path forward. "Does it matter?" she asked, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. Something flickered in Silas's expression. Not quite sympathy, not quite approval. Something else. "It should," he said quietly. The minister cleared his throat. "Well, shall we proceed with the ceremony? I've prepared the standard vows, though given the circumstances, we can keep it brief." "No vows," Silas interrupted. The minister blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said no vows. This isn't that kind of marriage." A ripple of fresh whispers spread through the crowd. Edgar looked panicked. "Now wait just a minute," Edgar started, stepping forward. "We had an agreement. You said you'd clear the debt if I— And I will." Silas pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and handed it to Edgar. "That's a signed discharge of all debts owed to the Graymore Bank and Lending Company, plus the outstanding accounts at Mitchell's General Store and the butcher's shop. You're clear." Edgar unfolded the paper with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the document. Clara watched her father's face shift from suspicion to disbelief to something like desperate relief. This is real?" "It's real. But the marriage will happen, just not the way you're thinking." Silas turned back to Clara. "I need someone who can work. Someone who won't run their mouth all over town about what I do up there. Someone who can learn and won't fall apart when things get hard. Your father said you fit that description. Was he lying?" Clara stared at him. This wasn't how she'd imagined this conversation going. She'd expected to be talked about, not talked to. Expected to be an object, not a participant. "I can work," she said slowly, "and I don't run my mouth." "Good. But I don't understand. If you don't want a wife, why go through with this at all?" Silas's jaw tightened slightly. "Because everyone in this town thinks they know me. Thinks they know what I am and what I do. And the only way to keep them from bothering me is to give them what they expect. A recluse who buys himself a wife isn't interesting. He's just pathetic. They'll talk for a week and then forget about it." The honesty was startling, almost brutal. "So I'm— what? A prop?" "You're a person who needs a way out, and I need someone I can trust not to bring the whole damn town up to my door every other week." He paused. "You work, you learn, you pull your weight. You'll have food, shelter, safety, more than you've got here." Clara's eyes flicked to her father, who was still staring at the debt discharge like it might disappear if he looked away. Then to the crowd, people she'd known her whole life, watching her like she was entertainment, like her pain was something to gossip about over Sunday dinner. "And if I say no?" she asked, turning back to Silas. "Then I walk out that door, take my papers with me, and your father's creditors come calling tomorrow morning." His expression didn't change. "Your choice." The minister coughed. "This is highly irregular." "I don't care." Silas kept his eyes on Clara. "Well?" Clara felt something crack open inside her chest, not her heart, that had been broken for a while now, something deeper, something that had been locked up tight since she was 14 and her mother died and her father started drinking and the world stopped making sense. Pride, maybe? Or hope? It didn't matter. She had nothing left to lose. "Fine," Claire said. "I'll go with you." Silas nodded once. "Then let's get this over with." The minister stammered through the shortest ceremony Clara had ever heard. No music, no flowers, no promises of love or cherishing or any of the things she'd once dreamed about when she was young and stupid enough to believe in fairy tales. Just words. Legal words that bound her to a stranger. When it was done, Silas didn't kiss her, didn't smile. He just turned and walked toward the door. Clara stood frozen for a moment, unsure if she was supposed to follow. "Clara." Her father's voice was quiet, almost ashamed. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd given up a long time ago. A man who'd chosen the bottle over his daughter, over his life, over everything. "Goodbye, Papa," she said. It was the last time she'd call him that. She followed Silas out of the chapel into the cold mountain air. The sky was gray, heavy with the promise of snow. A wagon waited at the bottom of the steps, loaded with supplies and pulled by two sturdy horses that looked better fed than most people in Graymore. Silas climbed up onto the driver's seat and glanced back at her. "You coming or not?" Clara gathered her skirt, the same worn dress she'd been wearing for 2 years, and climbed up beside him. She had no bags, no belongings. Everything she owned in the world was either on her back or left behind in her father's house, and none of it was worth going back for. As Silas snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward, Clara didn't look back at the chapel, didn't look at the town, didn't let herself think about what she was leaving behind or what she was heading toward. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, and tried not to shake. They rode in silence for the first hour. The road climbed steadily upward, leaving Graymore behind and winding into the dense pine forest that covered the lower slopes of the mountains. The air grew colder, sharper. Clara pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, wishing she had something warmer. "There's a coat in the back," Silas said without looking at her. "Canvas and wool. It'll fit." Clara hesitated, then climbed into the back of the wagon, careful not to disturb the supplies. She found the coat exactly where he'd said, folded neatly beneath a tarp. It was heavy, well made, and when she put it on, it smelled like pine smoke and leather. It fit almost perfectly. When she climbed back to the front, Silas gave her a brief glance. "Better?" "Yes, thank you." He nodded and turned his attention back to the road. Clara studied him from the corner of her eye. His hands on the reins were steady, scarred across the knuckles. He didn't fidget, didn't talk, just drove with the kind of quiet confidence that came from doing something 1,000 times. "How far is it?" she asked finally. "Another 3 hours? Maybe 4 if the weather turns." "Do people come up there often? To see you?" "No." "But you're a healer. Don't people need—" "If they need me bad enough, they'll come. Otherwise, they stay away." He paused. "Which is how I prefer it." Clara fell silent again. The trees grew thicker as they climbed, blocking out more of the already gray sky. Snow began to fall, light at first, just a few flakes drifting down through the branches. "Why did you really do this?" Clara asked quietly. Silas didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured, "Because I'm tired of people thinking they can push me around. Tired of the town council sending representatives up to check on me. Tired of the sheriff finding excuses to ask questions." He glanced at her. "A married man is less interesting than a hermit, less threatening. They'll leave me alone now." "And me? What happens to me in all this?" "That depends on you." He guided the horses around a fallen branch. "You can sit up there and feel sorry for yourself, or you can learn something. Your choice." The words stung, probably because they were true. Clara had spent the last 3 years feeling sorry for herself, for her mother's death, for her father's failures, for the life she'd lost. And where had it gotten her? Sold at an altar to a stranger. "What would I be learning?" she asked. "How to survive, how to be useful, how to not die when winter really hits." He shot her a look that might have been amused. "Think you can handle that?" Clara lifted her chin. "I've handled worse." "We'll see." The snow fell harder. The road grew steeper. And Clara Hensley, who had been nothing and no one in Graymore, rode deeper into the mountains with a man who saw her not as a burden or a shame, but as someone who might actually be worth something. It was the strangest feeling she'd ever had. They reached the cabin just as the light began to fail. It wasn't what Clara expected, not some falling apart shack or dark foreboding place from a ghost story. It was solid, well built, tucked into a clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a stone chimney already sending up a thin trail of smoke. Someone had been here recently. Silas brought the wagon to a stop and jumped down. "I had someone come up yesterday to get the fire started and bring in wood. Didn't want you freezing your first night." Clara climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from the long ride. The cabin looked bigger up close, one main room with what looked like a loft above, plus a lean-to attached to one side that probably served as storage or workspace. "Come on," Silas said, already unloading supplies. "Grab what you can carry. We'll get the rest later." Clara picked up a crate of vegetables and followed him to the door. Inside, the cabin was warm and surprisingly clean. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Shelves lined one wall filled with jars and bottles and bundles of dried herbs. A sturdy table sat in the center of the room with 2 chairs. A narrow bed was tucked into one corner, and a ladder led up to the loft. "You'll take the loft," Silas said, setting down his load. "There's a mattress up there and blankets. It's warmer than down here." Clara looked up at the loft, then back at him. Where will you sleep? Down here. I'm up most nights anyway, working. He gestured to the shelves. That's where I prepare medicines, tinctures, salves, dried herbs for teas. You'll learn what everything is and what it does. Clara set down her crate and looked around, trying to take it all in. This was her life now, this cabin, this work, this strange, quiet man who'd bought her freedom with a piece of paper and expected her to earn her keep. I don't know anything about healing, she admitted. You'll learn. What if I can't? What if I'm not? Then you'll fail. Silas met her eyes. But you'll fail trying, which is more than you were doing down in that town. The words hit harder than they should have. Clara wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she couldn't, because he was right. She'd been surviving, barely, and survival wasn't living. I'll learn, she said firmly. Good. Silas moved toward the door. I'm going to put the horses up and finish unloading. There's stew in the pot over the fire. Help yourself. We eat when we're hungry, not on a schedule. He left before she could respond. Clara stood in the middle of the cabin, alone for the first time since the ceremony, and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Then she walked to the fireplace, ladled herself a bowl of stew, and sat down at the table. It was the first meal she'd eaten in months that didn't taste like shame. That night, lying in the loft under a pile of heavy blankets, Clara stared up at the rough wooden beams above her and tried to figure out how she felt. Scared, definitely. Uncertain, out of place. But also something else. Something she couldn't quite name yet. Below, she could hear Silas moving around quietly, the clink of glass bottles and the soft rustling of dried plants. Working. Always working. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of her new life. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. She might as well try to be. The first week nearly killed her. Not physically, though her body ached in ways she didn't know were possible, but in every other way that mattered. Clara had thought she understood hard work. She'd scrubbed floors, hauled water, cooked meals over a temperamental stove that burned more food than it prepared. But that was nothing compared to what Silas expected. He woke her before dawn on the second day, calling up to the loft in that flat, no-nonsense voice of his. Daylight's wasting. Clara dragged herself out of the warmth of the blankets, her breath visible in the cold air. She climbed down the ladder, still wearing the same dress from yesterday because she didn't have another one, and found Silas already dressed and standing by the door with 2 heavy buckets. Water, he said, handing them to her. Stream's about 200 yards that way. Follow the path. Fill both buckets, bring them back. Don't spill. Clara took the buckets, surprised by their weight even empty. That's it? For now. She made it maybe 50 yards before her arms started shaking. The buckets banged against her legs with every step, and the cold bit through her dress like teeth. By the time she found the stream, a narrow ribbon of water running clear over smooth stones, her hands were numb, and her shoulders burned. She filled the buckets, trying not to think about how she'd have to carry them back full. The return trip was worse. Water sloshed over the sides no matter how carefully she walked, soaking her skirt and boots. Her arms trembled. Twice she had to stop and set the buckets down just to catch her breath, hating herself for the weakness. When she finally stumbled back into the clearing, Silas was splitting wood. He glanced at the buckets, then at her. You spilled about a quarter of it. I know, Clara said through gritted teeth. Do it again. This time, don't spill. She stared at him. What? You heard me. We need water. Real water, not half-empty buckets. He went back to swinging the axe. Go! Clara wanted to throw the buckets at his head, wanted to scream that she'd just walked 400 yards carrying what felt like half her body weight in frozen metal. But she didn't. Because part of her, the part that had stood in that chapel and decided to stop being pathetic, knew he was right. If she couldn't carry water without spilling it, how would she do anything else? She picked up the buckets and went back to the stream. This time, she filled them only 3/4 full, walked slower, kept her eyes on the path instead of the buckets, focused on her breathing, on her steps, on not letting the anger make her careless. When she set them down in front of the cabin 20 minutes later, they were still 3/4 full. Silas nodded. Better. Now go get more. We need 6 buckets to start the day. Clara made 5 more trips before he finally let her stop. By the time she finished, her arms felt like they might fall off. Her back screamed, and her hands were raw from the metal handles. But she'd done it. All 6 buckets, barely a drop spilled. Silas poured one into a large pot hanging over the fire, then looked at her properly for the first time that morning. "You didn't quit. You didn't give me a choice. There's always a choice." He handed her a cup of something hot that smelled like pine and mint. "Drink this. It'll help with the soreness." Clara took it, too tired to ask what it was. The first sip was bitter, almost unpleasantly so, but warmth spread through her chest and down into her aching muscles. "What is it?" "Willow bark, yarrow, bit of mint to make it less awful." Silas poured himself a cup. "You'll be making it yourself by next week." Clara wrapped her cold hands around the cup. "Is every day going to be like this?" "Worse, probably. Winter's coming for real. We've got about 3 weeks to get ready, which means there's no time for you to ease into things." He sat down at the table, steam rising from his own cup. "You need to be able to haul water, chop kindling, identify plants, prepare medicines, hunt, trap, preserve food, and keep yourself from freezing or starving when things get bad. Think you can learn all that in 3 weeks?" "I don't know." "Honest answer. I'll take it." He drank, then set his cup down. "Here's how this works. I show you something once, maybe twice, then you do it. You mess up, I tell you. You mess up again, I tell you again, but I'm not going to hold your hand through every step. You're smart enough to figure things out, or you're not. Either way, we'll know soon enough." It should have sounded cruel. Maybe it was cruel, but there was something about the directness of it that Clara appreciated. No false kindness, no pretending this was anything other than what it was, a test she had to pass to survive. "All right," she said. "Show me." The days blurred together into a rhythm of constant motion and learning. Silas taught her to identify plants, not just by sight, but by smell, by texture, by the places they grew. He'd take her into the forest with a basket and point out things she'd walked past her entire life without seeing. "Wild ginger," he said, crouching beside a low-growing plant with heart-shaped leaves. "Roots are good for nausea, stomach pain. You dig it up in fall, dry it, grind it. Makes a tea that tastes like dirt but works." Clara knelt beside him, studying the plant. "How do you remember all of this?" "Practice, repetition, paying attention." He moved to another plant a few feet away. "This is yarrow. Stops bleeding, reduces fever, helps with colds. You can use the leaves fresh or dried. What's the one we saw yesterday that looks similar?" Claire's mind went blank. They'd looked at dozens of plants yesterday. "I don't— Queen Anne's lace. Looks almost identical when it's young, but the leaves are different. Yarrow's more feathery, finer. Queen Anne's lace will make you sick if you use too much. See the difference?" She didn't, not really, but she nodded anyway. Silas gave her a flat look. "Don't lie to me. If you don't see it, say so." "I don't see it," Claire admitted, frustrated. "Then look closer. Touch them. Smell them. Use more than your eyes." She did, running her fingers over the delicate leaves, bringing them close to her face. And slowly, very slowly, she started to notice the differences. The texture, the way yarrow's leaves were almost soft, while Queen Anne's lace was rougher. "I think I see it now." "Good. Tomorrow you'll find me 5 yarrow plants on your own. If you bring me Queen Anne's lace by mistake, you'll know when your stomach starts cramping." Clara's eyes widened. "You wouldn't actually make me—" "No. But the mountain would if you got desperate and stupid enough to eat something you weren't sure about." He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Everything up here will teach you or kill you. I'd prefer you learn." She learned. Not quickly, and not without mistakes. She brought him the wrong plants more than once, cut her hand on a knife because she wasn't paying attention, burned herself on the edge of the pot, ruined an entire batch of salve by adding too much beeswax. Each time, Silas corrected her with the same even tone. "Try again." Never angry, never disappointed, just expectant, like failure was part of the process and she'd better get comfortable with it. The strange thing was, she did get comfortable with it. Back in Graymore, every mistake had felt like proof that she was worthless. Her father's sighs, the neighbors' pitying looks, the constant sense that she was failing at being the daughter, the woman, the person everyone expected. Here, a mistake was just information, something to learn from and move past. It was the most freeing thing she'd ever experienced. 2 weeks in, Silas handed her an axe. "You need to learn to split wood," he said, pointing to a pile of logs stacked near the cabin. "I'll show you the motion, then you practice." Clara took the axe, surprised by its weight. "I've never done this before." "I know. That's why I'm showing you." He took the axe back and set a log upright on the chopping block. "Feet shoulder width apart. Firm grip, but not tight. You'll tire yourself out. Let the axe do the work. It's about accuracy, not strength." He swung the axe up and brought it down in one smooth motion. The log split cleanly in half. "Your turn." Clara positioned herself the way he'd shown her, raised the axe, and brought it down. The blade hit the log at an angle and bounced off, jarring her shoulders. "Again. Keep your eyes on where you want to hit, not on the axe." She tried again, and again, and again. By the 10th swing, her arms were shaking. By the 20th, she'd managed to split exactly 2 logs, both of them crooked and uneven. Silas watched without comment, then finally stepped forward. "Enough for today. Your form's getting sloppy. We'll try again tomorrow." Clara set down the axe, breathing hard. Sweat had soaked through her dress despite the cold air. "I'm terrible at this." "You're learning. There's a difference." "Is there?" She looked at the pathetic pile of wood she'd managed to split. "Because it doesn't feel like it." Silas was quiet for a moment, then said, 3 weeks ago, you couldn't carry 2 buckets of water without spilling half of it. Yesterday you hauled 12 buckets without stopping. You didn't notice because you were too busy worrying about the next thing you couldn't do yet." Clara blinked, caught off guard by what might have been a compliment. "You're stronger than you were," Silas continued. "Faster, more careful. You don't flinch when I hand you a knife anymore, and you can identify 15 different medicinal plants without help. That's not nothing." Something warm unfurled in Clara's chest. Not quite pride, she wasn't sure she'd earned that yet, but something close. "Thank you," she said quietly. Silas nodded and turned toward the cabin. "Come on, I'll teach you how to make poultice for sore muscles. You'll need it." The nights were when Clara felt most out of place. During the day, there was always work to do, always something to learn or practice or accomplish. But at night, after the fire was banked and the evening meal was finished, there was just quiet. Silas would sit at his workbench, grinding herbs or mixing tinctures or writing notes in a leather-bound journal. Clara would sit by the fire, mending clothes or sorting dried plants or trying to remember everything she'd learned that day. They didn't talk much. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. It should have been uncomfortable, awkward, but somehow it wasn't. One night, about 3 weeks in, Clara broke the silence. "Why do you live up here alone?" Silas didn't look up from the mortar and pestle he was working. "Same reason you left Graymore. Nothing for me down there." "But you're a healer. People need healers. People need a lot of things they don't appreciate until it's gone." He added a few drops of liquid to whatever he was grinding. "I got tired of being needed and resented at the same time." Clara thought about that. "What do you mean?" Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he set down the pestle and leaned back in his chair. "I apprenticed with the town doctor when I was younger, learned everything he could teach me, then taught myself the rest. Herbs, natural remedies, things that worked when his mercury treatments and bloodletting didn't." He paused. "People came to me when they were desperate, when their child was dying and the doctor had given up, when nothing else worked, and I'd help them. Most of the time, anyway. But the moment they were better, they'd go right back to pretending I didn't exist. Or worse, they'd whisper that I was dangerous, that I used dark methods." "Witchcraft. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Silas gave her a dry look. "You believed the stories too, didn't you, before you came here?" Clara felt her face heat. "I didn't know what to believe." "Exactly. Nobody does. They just assume the worst because it's easier than admitting they don't understand something." He went back to his work. "So I left. Built this cabin. Let them come to me if they really need help, and otherwise I keep to myself." "Doesn't it get lonely?" "Sometimes." He glanced at her. "Less so lately." The comment hung in the air between them, unexpected and oddly heavy. Clara felt her pulse quicken for reasons she didn't want to examine. She focused on the shirt she was mending, needles suddenly clumsy in her fingers. "Well," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I suppose I'm useful for something besides hauling water." "More than you know," Silas said quietly. She looked up, but he'd already turned back to his work, expression unreadable in the firelight. Clara went back to her mending, but her hands were shaking slightly, and it had nothing to do with the cold. The first snow came in late October, heavy and relentless. Clara woke to a strange brightness filling the loft and climbed down to find the world transformed. Everything was white. The clearing, the trees, the roof of the lean-to where the horses sheltered. Silas was already awake, standing at the window with a cup of tea. Beautiful, isn't it? Clara joined him, staring out at the pristine landscape. It's so quiet. Won't stay that way. We've got work to do. He was right. The snow meant checking on the horses, making sure the lean-to was secure, bringing in extra wood, clearing paths to the stream and the outhouse. It meant working twice as hard to do half as much. But Clara found she didn't mind. There was something almost peaceful about the work now. The rhythm of it. The way her body had adapted, grown stronger, stopped protesting every movement. She could carry the water buckets without stopping, could split wood for an hour without her arms giving out, could identify plants even under a dusting of snow. She'd become capable. It was a strange feeling. One afternoon, while Silas was out checking his trap lines, Clara decided to surprise him by making the evening meal herself. She'd watched him cook often enough, simple, hearty food that stuck to your ribs and warmed you from the inside out. She pulled out the smoked venison, some of the root vegetables they'd stored, dried herbs she now recognized by sight and smell. Got the pot heating over the fire, added fat, started building the stew the way she'd seen him do it. She was so focused on getting it right that she didn't hear Silas return until he spoke from the doorway. Smells good. Clara jumped, nearly dropping the spoon. I didn't hear you come in. Clearly. He stomped snow off his boots and came inside, bringing cold air with him. What are you making? Stew, or trying to. She stirred the pot nervously. I thought I don't know, pull my weight. Silas came over to look, and Clara held her breath, waiting for him to tell her she'd done it wrong. Used too much of something or not enough of something else. Instead, he nodded. Good color. Did you add the thyme? Yes, and a bay leaf like you do. Smart. He grabbed a spoon and tasted it, considering. Needs salt, and maybe a bit more time, but it's good, Clara. Really good. The praise hit her harder than it should have. Clara felt her throat tighten unexpectedly, emotion rising up without warning. Thank you, she managed. Silas gave her an odd look, then his expression softened, just slightly, just enough for her to notice. You've come a long way, he said. From that girl in the chapel who looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. I didn't have a choice. You did. You could have given up. Could have made yourself useless until I sent you back down the mountain. He paused. But you didn't. Clara stirred the stew, not trusting herself to meet his eyes. Where would I go? Back to my father? Back to a town that watched me get sold like livestock? No. You'd go somewhere new, somewhere nobody knew you. Silas leaned against the table. You're strong enough now, smart enough. You could survive on your own if you wanted to. The words sent a jolt through her. Are you saying you want me to leave? No. He said it quickly, firmly. I'm saying you don't have to stay. There's a difference. Clara finally looked at him, this strange man who'd bought her freedom and then given it back to her piece by piece, lesson by lesson, bucket of water by bucket of water. I know, she said softly, but I'm not going anywhere. Something passed between them in that moment. Not quite understanding, not quite agreement. Something more fundamental. Recognition. Two people who'd been pushed to the edges of the world, finding an unexpected place to stand. Silas cleared his throat and moved toward the door. I'll grab more wood. Stew should be ready in about 20 minutes. After he left, Clara stood by the fire, stirring the pot and trying to identify the feeling spreading through her chest. It took her a while to name it. Belonging. That night, they ate the stew together at the small table, the wind howling outside while the fire crackled warm and bright. Silas told her about the fox he'd seen on the trapline. Clever thing that had stolen bait without getting caught. Clara told him about the plant she'd found near the stream that she thought might be wintergreen but wasn't sure. Bring me a sample tomorrow, Silas said. We'll identify it properly. All right. They fell into comfortable silence, and Clara realized this was the longest conversation they'd had that wasn't about work or survival or learning. This was just talking, the way people did when they knew each other, when they were comfortable, when they mattered to each other. Later, as Clara climbed up to the loft and settled under the warm blankets, she could hear Silas moving around below, the familiar sounds of him preparing his workspace for another night of mixing medicines and making notes. She closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her. For the first time since her mother died, Clara Hensley felt safe. Not because nothing bad could happen. Plenty of bad things could happen up here in the wilderness, and probably would, but because she knew she could handle them. She'd learned to carry water and split wood and identify plants. She'd learned to work through pain and exhaustion and doubt. She'd learned that failure wasn't the end of anything, just the middle. And maybe most important, she'd learned that she was worth more than her father's debts or her town's pity. She was worth her own effort, her own strength, her own life. The weeks rolled into November and the snow deepened. The work got harder but also more routine. Clara and Silas moved around each other like dancers who'd learned the steps, passing tools and ingredients and information without needing many words. He taught her to set snares for rabbits, how to skin and butcher game without wasting meat, how to render fat for candles and cooking, how to tell if water was safe to drink just by looking at it. She taught him that someone could actually remember where he'd put things if they organized the shelves properly, that food tasted better with a little creativity, that silence didn't always have to be filled, but sometimes a story or a laugh made the work go faster. They were becoming partners. Not in the way the townspeople thought. Clara still slept in the loft. Silas still kept his distance, and there was nothing romantic about frozen hands and sore muscles and the constant smell of herbs, but in the way that mattered. One evening in mid-November, a storm rolled in fast and vicious. The wind screamed through the trees, and snow fell so thick Clara couldn't see the lean-to from the cabin window. Silas stood by the door, staring out into the white void. "Horses," he said. "What about them?" "Need to make sure they're secure. The lean-to's strong, but this wind could tear something loose." He reached for his heavy coat. "I'll be back." "I'm coming with you," Clara said, already grabbing her own coat. "No, it's too dangerous out there." "Then it's too dangerous for you, too." She pulled on her boots. "Two sets of hands are better than one. You said so yourself." Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He nodded once. "Stay close. If I lose sight of you in this, you're as good as dead." They roped themselves together with a length of strong cord and pushed out into the storm. The wind hit Clara like a fist, stealing her breath. Snow whipped into her face, stinging and blinding. She grabbed onto Silas's coat and followed him into the white chaos, trusting him to know the way. They found the horses anxious but unharmed. One section of the lean-to's roof had started to pull away, and together they hammered it back into place, fingers numb and clumsy inside their gloves. The journey back to the cabin was worse. The wind had shifted, blowing directly into their faces. Clara's lungs burned with cold. Her legs felt like wood. Twice she stumbled, and twice Silas hauled her back up without a word. When they finally crashed through the cabin door, both of them were shaking violently. Silas slammed the door shut and immediately started stripping off his wet outer layers. "Get those clothes off, now! Frostbite's already setting in." Clara's hands were shaking too hard to manage the buttons. Silas crossed to her, his own hands barely steadier, and helped her out of the soaked coat and dress. "Sit by the fire. I'll get blankets." She sank down in front of the fireplace in just her thin underthings, teeth chattering so hard she could barely think. Silas wrapped her in every blanket they had, then built up the fire until it roared. "Hands," he said, kneeling beside her. "Let me see them." Clara held out her hands. The fingers were white, waxy-looking. Silas swore under his breath and began rubbing them carefully, bringing blood back to the surface. It hurt, sharp, burning pain that made Clara gasp. I know it hurts, but we have to get circulation back." He worked methodically, his own hands probably just as cold but steady anyway. Gradually, feeling returned. The white faded to pink, then red. Clara's fingers throbbed, but the waxy look was gone. "You'll be all right," Silas said quietly. "Another few minutes out there and you might have lost a finger, maybe two." "But I didn't." "No?" He met her eyes, and there was something raw in his expression, something almost like fear. "You could have. I should never have let you come." "You didn't let me do anything. I chose." Clara's voice was stronger now, warmer. "And we got the job done together. That's what matters." Silas looked at her for a long moment, still kneeling beside her, his hands wrapped around hers. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said finally. "Good or bad? I'm still deciding." But the corner of his mouth twitched, almost like a smile, and Clara felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. They stayed by the fire for hours, wrapped in blankets and listening to the storm rage outside. Silas made hot tea with whiskey, and they drank it slowly, warmth spreading through their bodies. "Tell me something," Clara said eventually. "Something true." "About what?" "Anything. I feel like I know how to split wood and identify yarrow, but I don't really know you." Silas was quiet, staring into the fire. Clara thought he might not answer, might deflect the way he usually did when conversation turned personal. But then he spoke. "My mother died when I was 12. Fever. The town doctor tried everything he knew, but it wasn't enough. I watched her suffer for 3 days before she finally let go." He paused. "That's when I decided to learn. To really learn. Not just what the doctors knew, but everything. Every remedy, every herb, every treatment anyone had ever tried. I thought if I knew enough, I could save people. Make sure nobody else had to watch someone they loved die for no good reason." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It made me who I am." He took a sip of tea. "But it also made me angry. At doctors who thought they knew everything. At people who ignored remedies that worked because they came from the wrong source. At a whole town that would rather let someone die than admit they might be wrong." "Is that why you left?" "Part of it." He glanced at her. "The other part was simpler. I didn't belong there, never did. Up here, I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not." "I know that feeling," Clara said softly. They sat in silence for a while, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. "My turn," Silas said. "Tell me something true." Clara thought about it. There were so many true things she could say. That she was scared most of the time. That she still missed her mother. That coming here had saved her life in more ways than one. But what came out was simpler. "I'm happy here." Silas turned to look at her, surprise crossing his face. "I know that probably sounds strange," Clara continued. "It's hard work, and I'm cold most of the time, and my hands hurt, and I still can't split wood without feeling like my arms might fall off. But I'm happy. Happier than I've been in years. Maybe ever. Why? Because I matter here. What I do matters. I'm not just existing. I'm building something, learning something, becoming someone." She met his eyes. "Because of you." The words hung between them, heavier than she'd intended. Silas didn't look away. "You did that yourself. I just gave you the tools." "Maybe, but you're the one who believed I could use them." Something shifted in the air, a thickness, a tension that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, and Clara was only now brave enough to notice it. Silas reached out slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers gentle against her skin. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. "Braver, too." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. "So are you." They stayed like that, close enough to feel each other's warmth, the storm still raging outside, but somehow distant now, unimportant. Then Silas pulled back, clearing his throat. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be another hard day." The moment broke, but it didn't disappear. It just settled into the space between them, waiting. Clara nodded and stood, still wrapped in blankets. "Good night, Silas." "Good night, Clara." She climbed up to the loft and lay down, her mind racing. Something had changed tonight. Some invisible line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Clara wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to find out. December came quietly at first, bringing deeper snow and colder nights. Clara had stopped counting the days since she'd left Greymoor. Time felt different up here, measured in tasks completed and skills learned rather than dates on a calendar. She could start a fire now in under 5 minutes, even with damp kindling, could skin a rabbit without wasting meat, could mix a fever-reducing tea that actually worked because she'd tested it on herself when she caught a cold in late November, and Silas had let her treat herself, watching from across the room with those sharp gray eyes but never interfering. "You know what you're doing," he'd said when she'd looked to him for confirmation. And she had known. That was the startling part. The other startling part was how comfortable they'd become with each other. Not in any obvious way. They still maintained a careful distance, still slept in separate spaces, still rarely touched except when passing tools or ingredients. But there was an ease now that hadn't existed before. A familiarity. Silas had started asking her opinion on things. Which herbs to use for which ailments. Whether they had enough firewood stocked or needed to cut more. Small decisions, but they mattered because he actually listened to her answers. And Clara found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, the way he moved around the cabin with unconscious grace. The rare moments when he smiled, brief and usually crooked, but genuine. The sound of his voice late at night when he read aloud from his medical journals, not to her exactly, but not hiding it from her either. She was in trouble, and she knew it, but she couldn't quite bring herself to care. The horses heard them first. Clara was outside pulling water from the well they'd dug when the wind was too fierce to reach the stream. The horses in the lean-to started making noise, not quite panicked, but alert, nervous. She straightened, listening. Voices carried on the wind, men's voices, still distant, but getting closer. Clara's stomach dropped. They never had visitors. Never. She left the bucket and ran for the cabin. Silas was at his workbench, grinding something with the mortar and pestle. He looked up when she burst through the door, instantly reading her expression. What is it? Someone's coming. Multiple people, I think. The horses are spooked. Silas set down the pestle and moved to the window. His jaw tightened. How many? I don't know. I couldn't see them yet. He crossed to the door and stepped outside. Clara followed, her heart hammering. 3 men emerged from the tree line on horseback, led by someone Clara recognized with a sick jolt of dread. Victor. Her brother looked exactly the same as he had 2 months ago, tall, broad-shouldered, with their father's dark hair and their mother's fine features. But where their mother had been kind, Victor had inherited only Edgar's capacity for cruelty and self-interest. The 2 men with him wore badges. Sheriff's deputies by the look of them. Victor spotted Clara and smiled, the kind of smile that had always preceded something unpleasant when they were children. Well, well, there she is. Hello, sister. Clara's hands curled into fists. What are you doing here, Victor? Can't a man visit his own family? He dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. The deputies stayed on their horses, hands resting casually near their gun belts, especially when he's been so worried about her. I'm fine. You can leave now. Oh, I don't think so. Victor's smile widened as he turned his attention to Silas. You must be Thornridge, the hermit who bought himself a wife. Interesting transaction, that. Very unconventional. Silas didn't move, didn't react. State your business. My business is family business. See, after Clara here ran off with you, I didn't run off. I was sold. After you left, Victor continued, as if she hadn't spoken, our dear father had some time to think about what he'd done. The guilt ate at him, really it did, drinking himself to death over it now, actually. So he did some research, had the family lawyer look into things. He pulled a folded document from his coat. Turns out this land you're squatting on, it belongs to the Hensley Family Trust, has for 3 generations. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. That's not possible. Oh, it's very possible. See, our great-grandfather won this land in a card game back in 1847. Never did anything with it. Too far out. Too hard to develop. But it's been in the family records all this time, taxes paid and everything. Victor unfolded the paper. I have the deed right here, signed, sealed, legal as can be. One of the deputies spoke up, a thin man with a gray mustache. We've verified it with the county records. The claim is legitimate. Silas's expression remained neutral, but Clara saw his hands tense. If this land belongs to the Hensley family, why are you here now? Why not 20 years ago when I first built this cabin? Because 20 years ago, we didn't need it, Victor said smoothly. But times change. The lumber industry is expanding. The railroad's talking about running a line through these mountains. This land is worth something now. He looked around the clearing with exaggerated appreciation. You've done a nice job with the place, really. Cabin's solid, good well. Almost makes me feel bad for evicting you. Almost, the second deputy echoed, grinning. Clara stepped forward. You can't do this. Actually, I can. That's the beauty of legal ownership, dear sister. I own this land, which means I decide who stays and who goes. Victor's smile turned sharp. Of course, we could come to an arrangement. Thornridge pays me fair market value for the land, let's say $500, and I'll sign it over to him free and clear. Generous, really, considering what it's actually worth. $500. Might as well have been $5,000. Clara knew Silas didn't have that kind of money. Nobody did. Not up here. And if I refuse, Silas asked quietly, then I file for eviction. Sheriff carries it out. You've got 30 days to vacate the premises. Victor gestured to the cabin. Everything you've built here becomes property of the Hensley estate. That's me, in case you're wondering. This is theft, Clara said, her voice shaking with anger. You're stealing from him. I'm exercising my legal rights. There's a difference. Victor turned back to his horse. You've got until January 15th. After that, these deputies will come back with the full force of the law. I suggest you use the time to pack. Wait. Clara's mind raced, desperate. What about me? I'm a Hensley too. Don't I have any claim to the family land? Victor laughed, actually laughed. You signed away any claim to family property when you married him. Wives belong to their husbands, Clara. You're a Thornridge now, not a Hensley. Or did you not understand what you were agreeing to when you stood in that chapel? The words hit like a slap. Clara had spent 2 months building herself into someone stronger, more capable, more independent. But in the eyes of the law, she was still property, just transferred from one man to another. That's enough, Silas said, his voice carrying an edge Clara had never heard before. You've delivered your message. Now leave. Gladly. This place gives me the creeps anyway. Victor mounted his horse, then paused. Oh, and Clara, Father wants you to know he's sorry for what it's worth. It's worth nothing, Clara said flatly. Victor shrugged and turned his horse toward the tree line. The deputies followed, and within minutes they disappeared into the forest, leaving only hoof prints in the snow. Clara stood frozen, her whole body trembling, not from cold, but from rage and helplessness and a familiar shame she'd thought she'd left behind in Graymore. Silas was quiet beside her, staring at the empty trees. Is it true? Clara asked finally. Could they really take this from you? Yes. The single word was worse than a long explanation would have been. There has to be something we can do, some way to fight this. With what? I don't have $500, don't have a lawyer, don't have any proof that my claim is stronger than his. Silas turned back toward the cabin. And even if I did, the law's pretty clear about property rights. If he has the deed, he wins. Clara followed him inside, her mind spinning. So that's it? We just give up? Let him steal everything you've built? I didn't say that. Silas went to his workbench and started organizing his tools with sharp, precise movements. I said the law's clear. That doesn't mean I'm leaving. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. He set down a jar harder than necessary. But I'll figure something out. Clara wanted to help, wanted to fix this, but she had no idea how. She was the reason Victor had found this place at all. If Silas hadn't married her, hadn't taken on her family's burden, he'd be fine right now. This is my fault, she said quietly. Silas looked up sharply. No. Yes, it is. Victor only cares about this land because of me. Because I'm connected to you now and he wants to… Stop! Silas crossed the room and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. This is not your fault. Your brother is a greedy bastard who saw an opportunity and took it. That's on him, not you. But if I hadn't come here, then I'd still be alone up here, and you'd still be trapped in that town, and neither of us would be better off. His hands tightened slightly. You didn't cause this, Clara, and I don't regret bringing you here, not for a second. Understand? Clara's throat was tight. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Silas let go and stepped back, running a hand through his hair. I need to think. Need to figure out what options we have. We, Clara repeated. You keep saying we. Yes, we. He met her eyes again. Or did you think I'd send you back down the mountain the first time things got difficult? I don't know. I don't know what you'd do. Well, now you do. Silas turned back to his workbench. We're in this together, for better or worse. The words echoed the marriage vows neither of them had actually spoken, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. All right, she said. Then we fight. We fight, Silas agreed. The next 2 weeks were tense. Silas spent hours poring over old documents and maps, trying to find some loophole or precedent that might help their case. Clara made the long trek down to the nearest trading post to ask subtle questions about property law and land claims, trying not to reveal too much. The answers weren't encouraging. Victor's right, the trading post owner told her, a grizzled man named Hutchins who'd lived in these mountains for 40 years. If he's got the original deed and the family trust documents, his claim's solid. Unless Thornridge can prove he bought the land legally or that it was abandoned, he doesn't have much recourse. What about squatters' rights? Claire asked. Silas has been living there for years. Squatters' rights don't apply if the owner was paying taxes and maintaining ownership, and it sounds like the Hensley family was doing both. Hutchins gave her a sympathetic look. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thornridge. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. Mrs. Thornridge. The name still felt strange. Clara bought the supplies they needed and made the long walk back to the cabin, her mind churning the whole way. There had to be something they could do, some way to fight back that didn't involve money they didn't have or legal expertise they couldn't afford. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the second set of hoofprints in the snow near the cabin. Clara stopped, her heart racing. The prints were fresh, maybe an hour old. They came from the south and circled the cabin before heading back the way they'd come. Someone had been watching. She ran the last 100 yards to the cabin and burst through the door. Silas! He looked up from the table where he'd been sketching something. What's wrong? Someone was here, on horseback. They circled the cabin and left. Silas was on his feet immediately. He grabbed his rifle from above the door and went outside. Clara followed, her breath visible in the cold air. They found the tracks easily enough. Silas knelt beside them, studying the depth and spacing. Single rider, heavy, probably male. He stood and followed the trail with his eyes. They didn't approach the cabin directly, stayed back in the trees, watching. Victor? Maybe. Or one of his deputies. Silas's jaw tightened. They're keeping tabs on us, making sure we don't run. Would we? Run? Silas looked at her for a long moment. Would you want to? Clara thought about it honestly. They could pack what they could carry and disappear into the mountains. Start over somewhere else. It would be hard, brutal even, but they'd survive. But they'd also be running, giving up, letting Victor win. No, Clara said. I'm tired of running from my family. Good, because so am I. They went back inside and Silas barred the door, something he'd never done before. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the loft staring at the ceiling beams and listening to Silas move around below. Around midnight, she heard him curse quietly, followed by the sound of something being thrown. She climbed down the ladder. Silas was standing by the fireplace, hands braced against the mantel, his head bowed. Papers were scattered across the table behind him, covered in his tight handwriting and sketches. Silas? He didn't turn around. Go back to bed, Clara. Not until you tell me what's wrong. What's wrong is that I've spent 2 weeks looking for a solution, and there isn't one. His voice was rough, frustrated. Every option I come up with requires either money we don't have, or time we don't have, or connections we don't have. I can't fight this legally, can't buy him out, can't intimidate him into backing down. Clara approached slowly. So what do we do? I don't know. Silas finally turned to face her, and she saw exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I've never not known what to do before. I've always been able to figure things out, fix things, find a way through. But this? He gestured helplessly at the scattered papers. This is different. Clara's heart ached seeing him like this, not because he was weak, but because he was finally letting her see that he didn't have all the answers. Then maybe we stop trying to do this alone, she said quietly. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we go to town, talk to people, see if anyone else has had problems with Victor or knows something about the land claim that we don't. Clara stepped closer. You've been up here alone for so long that you've forgotten people can be useful sometimes. People can also be dangerous. So can my brother, but we're not going to beat him by hiding up here and hoping he changes his mind. Clara met his eyes. We need help, Silas, and I know you hate asking for it, but sometimes that's what survival looks like. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, short and bitter, but still a laugh. When did you get so smart? I had a good teacher. He shook his head, something almost like fondness in his eyes. All right, we'll go to town, but we do it carefully. Victor has friends there, and I don't trust anyone who wears a badge. Agreed. They spent the rest of the night planning who they could talk to, what questions to ask, how to approach this without tipping Victor off to what they were doing. By the time dawn broke, they had something resembling a strategy. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had before. The trip to Greymoor took most of the day. Clara felt her anxiety increase with every mile they descended, every familiar landmark that came into view. She hadn't been back since the wedding, hadn't wanted to be, but now she had no choice. They left the wagon at the edge of town and walked in on foot, less conspicuous that way. Claire kept her head down, the hood of her coat pulled up against the cold and against curious eyes. Their first stop was the county records office, a small building near the courthouse where dusty ledgers tracked every land transaction in the territory. The clerk was a mousy woman named Agnes who'd gone to school with Clara's mother. She looked up when they entered, and her eyes widened in recognition. Clara Hensley? Clara Thornridge now, Clara corrected, surprised by how natural it sounded. Agnes's gaze flicked to Silas, then back to Clara. I heard you'd married. Didn't expect to see you back here. We need to look at some land records, property in the northern mountains. Clara gave her what she hoped was a friendly smile. Is that possible? Agnes hesitated. What property specifically? The parcel that Silas, my husband, has been living on for the past 20 years. Understanding dawned in Agnes's eyes, followed by sympathy. You heard about the Hensley claim then. We heard. We want to verify it. Agnes glanced toward the back room where her supervisor likely sat, then lowered her voice. Your brother was here last month, had me pull all the records going back to 1847. The deed is legitimate, Clara. I checked it myself. Clara's heart sank. You're sure? I'm sure. Benjamin Hensley won the land in a card game from a prospector named Morrison, filed the deed in 1848, paid taxes every year since. It's all documented. Agnes paused. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. What about Silas's claim? He's been living there, improving the land. Doesn't matter if the original owner maintained the title. Your brother's within his rights. Agnes leaned forward. But between you and me, Victor's been making a lot of noise about that land lately, talking to timber companies, surveyors. I think he's planning to sell it. Silas spoke for the first time. How much is he asking? I heard $2,000, maybe more. Clara felt sick. Victor wasn't just evicting them for spite, he was doing it for profit. They thanked Agnes and left the records office. Outside, the winter sun was already sinking toward the horizon. Where to next? Silas asked. Clara thought about it. Mitchell's General Store. The owner knew my mother. He might know something useful. But Mitchell's was a dead end. So was the blacksmith and the minister. Everyone they talked to confirmed the same thing. Victor's claim was legal, and there was nothing Silas could do about it. By the time evening fell, they were both exhausted and discouraged. They were walking back toward where they'd left the wagon when a voice called out from the shadows of an alley. Mrs. Thornridge, a word? Clara turned to find Sheriff Dawson stepping into the fading light. He was an older man, heavy-set, with a badge that gleamed even in the dim evening. Sheriff, Clara said carefully. Dawson nodded to Silas. Thornridge, heard you two were in town asking questions. Is that a crime? No, but it's curious, especially given that your brother-in-law filed an eviction notice just yesterday. Dawson's expression was unreadable. Seems like you might be planning to cause trouble. We're planning to understand our options, Clara said. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Dawson stepped closer. See, Victor Hensley is a respected member of this community, sits on the town council, donates to the church, and he's got legal ownership of that land you're squatting on. The law's pretty clear about what happens to squatters. Silas's hands curled into fists. I've been living on that land for 20 years, built everything there with my own hands. And now he's trying to steal it because he smells money. That's not how he tells it. He says he's reclaiming family property that you've been using without permission. Dawson's voice hardened. And unless you can prove otherwise, that's how the court will see it too. So you're on his side, Clara said flatly. I'm on the side of the law. And the law says that deed trumps occupation. Dawson adjusted his gun belt. My advice? Take what you can carry and find somewhere else to live. Trying to fight this will only make things harder. Harder for who? Silas asked. For everyone, but especially for you. Dawson turned to leave, then paused. And Mrs. Thornridge, your brother asked me to give you a message. He says if you come back home, he'll let this whole thing go. Says families should stick together. Clara felt cold fury rise in her chest. Tell my brother he can go to hell. Dawson shrugged. Suit yourself. But don't say you weren't warned. He walked away, leaving them standing in the gathering darkness. Silas turned to Clara. Did he just threaten us? He did. And did your brother just try to bribe you? He did. Clara's hands were shaking, but not from fear, from rage. Victor wants me back under his control. That's what this is really about. The land is just leverage. Then we don't give him what he wants. Agreed. Clara looked back at the town, the place she'd grown up, the place that had never really felt like home. Let's get out of here. This place makes my skin crawl. They walked back to the wagon in silence, both lost in thought. The ride back to the cabin was long and cold. Clara huddled under blankets in the wagon bed while Silas drove, the darkness pressing in from all sides. We're running out of time, Silas said finally. I know. And we're running out of options. I know that too. Clara sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. But I'm not giving up, and neither are you. Silas glanced back at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Victor expects us to roll over, expects us to either run or cave to his demands, and that's exactly why we won't. Clara's voice was steady now, certain. We're going to stand our ground, and when he comes back on January 15th, we're going to make him work for every inch of this place. That could get ugly. I don't care. I'm done being pushed around by my family, done being treated like property they can trade or sell or use as leverage. Clara met his eyes. This is my home now, our home, and I'm not leaving it without a fight. Silas looked at her for a long moment, something like pride flickering across his face. All right then, he said. We fight. They reached the cabin near midnight. The clearing was dark and still, the snow reflecting what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. Silas helped Clara down from the wagon, and they stood there for a moment, looking at the cabin that had become so much more than just shelter. Whatever happens, Silas said quietly, I want you to know that these last few months have meant something to me. You've meant something. Clara's breath caught. Silas, I'm not good with words. Never have been. But you should know that bringing you here was the best decision I've made in a long time. Maybe ever. Clara reached out and took his hand. In the moonlight, she could see his expression, open and honest in a way she'd never seen before. I feel the same way, she said softly. They stood there, hands clasped, the world quiet around them. Then Silas squeezed her hand once and let go, turning toward the cabin. Come on, we've got work to do. Because they did. January 15th was coming whether they were ready or not. And when it came, Clara Hensley Thornridge would be standing right here, ready to fight for the life she'd built and the man who'd helped her build it. She wasn't the scared girl from the altar anymore. She was something else entirely. And Victor was about to find out exactly what that meant. The days between their trip to Graymoor and January 15th stretched and compressed like something alive. Sometimes an hour felt like a minute. Sometimes a minute felt like forever. Clara and Silas prepared without talking much about what they were preparing for. They just worked, stockpiled firewood until they had enough to last through spring, preserved every scrap of food they could find or trap, reinforced the cabin's door with extra planks and iron brackets Silas had been saving for years. You think he'll try to break in? Clara asked, watching him work. I think we should be ready for anything. She couldn't argue with that. They also made copies of everything important. Silas's medical journals, his plant identification notes, the maps he'd drawn of trap lines and water sources. Clara bundled them carefully and hid them in a hollowed-out log behind the lean-to, wrapped in oilcloth to keep them dry. If we lose the cabin, she said when Silas asked what she was doing, at least we won't lose everything you know. He'd looked at her then with something raw in his expression, and for a moment she thought he might say something important. But he just nodded and went back to work. The nights were harder than the days. They'd sit by the fire after supper, the silence heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Clara would mend clothes that didn't need mending. Silas would sharpen tools that were already sharp. Finally, on January 10th, Clara couldn't take it anymore. What are we going to do when they come? Silas set down the knife he'd been honing. Stand our ground. And then what? They'll have the law on their side. They'll have guns. So do I. Silas. Clara put down her sewing. I need you to be honest with me. What's the actual plan here? Because standing our ground sounds brave, but it also sounds like a good way to get killed. He was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful. The plan is to make it costly enough that Victor decides it's not worth it. We can't win legally, but we can make the process difficult. Make him look bad. Make the sheriff question whether this is really worth the trouble. He looked at her. We're betting that Victor's greed has limits, that at some point easier money will look more attractive than fighting us for this land. And if we're wrong, if he doesn't have limits, then we lose, and we figure out what comes after that. Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But I'm not walking away without making him work for it. This place is mine, Clara. I built it. I earned it. And I'll be damned if I let him take it just because some ancestor of his won a card game 80 years ago. Clara understood that feeling right down to her bones. This place had become hers too, in a way nothing ever had before. The cabin where she'd learned to be strong, the forest where she'd learned to survive, the man sitting across from her who'd taught her that she was worth more than her family had ever believed. All right, she said, then we make it costly. January 14th arrived cold and clear. Clara woke early, her stomach churning with nerves she couldn't quite name. She climbed down from the loft to find Silas already up, standing by the window with a cup of tea. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Haven't slept properly in a week. He handed her his cup without looking away from the window. Drink. It's the calming blend. Clara took it, tasting chamomile and valerian root. You think they'll come early? Try to catch us off guard? Victor's not that smart. He'll come exactly when he said he would, with exactly the show of force he thinks will intimidate us. Silas finally turned to look at her. The question is how many men he brings. Does it matter? Depends on what you mean by matter. More men means he's serious, but it also means more witnesses. Harder for him to do anything too extreme without word getting back to town. Clara hadn't thought of it that way. So we want witnesses. We want the right kind of witnesses, people who'll talk, people who might actually question whether what Victor's doing is right, even if it's legal. Silas moved away from the window. Which is why I sent a letter to the territorial newspaper last week. Clara nearly dropped the cup. You what? Sent a letter. Told them about a land dispute in the northern mountains. A man being evicted from property he's occupied and improved for 20 years. Threw in some details about corrupt sheriffs and powerful families using the law to steal from common folk. He shrugged. Might not amount to anything, but it might. Silas, that's... Clara didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That's brilliant. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to get your hopes up. Newspapers ignore letters all the time, especially from nobodies like me. But I figured it was worth a try. Clara set down the cup and crossed the room. Before she could second-guess herself, she wrapped her arms around him. Silas went very still for a moment, then slowly returned the embrace. His arms were solid and warm, and Clara pressed her face against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of pine smoke and herbs. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For fighting, for not giving up, for... She pulled back to look at him. For seeing me as someone worth standing beside. Silas's expression softened. He raised one hand and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. Clara Hensley Thornridge, he said quietly, you are the strongest person I've ever met. And I've never been more certain of anything than I am of standing beside you. They stood there close enough that Clara could feel his heartbeat, could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. The moment stretched, tension building like a drawn bowstring. Then Silas stepped back, clearing his throat. We should eat something. Going to be a long day. Clara nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that washed through her. Right, long day. But as she moved to prepare breakfast, she caught Silas watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something that looked like longing and fear and determination all mixed together. Maybe after this was over, if they survived it, there would be time to figure out what existed between them, if they survived it. They came at noon, just as Silas had predicted. Clara heard them before she saw them. The sound of multiple horses, the jangle of tack, men's voices carrying through the cold air. She was outside splitting wood when they emerged from the tree line, and she set down the axe slowly, deliberately, before walking to stand in front of the cabin. Silas came out to join her, rifle held loosely in one hand. Victor led the group, flanked by Sheriff Dawson and 4 deputies. But there were others too, men Clara didn't recognize, dressed too well to be ordinary law enforcement. Lawyers, probably. Or witnesses Victor had paid to be here. And behind them, to Clara's surprise, rode a thin man in spectacles with a notebook in his hand. The newspaper had sent someone after all. Victor dismounted with the easy confidence of a man who knew he'd already won. He pulled a document from his coat and held it up. Silas Thornridge, Clara Thornridge, I'm here to execute a lawful eviction order signed by Judge Morrison. You have 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and vacate these premises. Any property left behind becomes part of the Hensley estate. No, Clara said. The single word rang out clear and firm across the clearing. Victor's smile faltered slightly. Excuse me? I said no, we're not leaving. Sheriff Dawson stepped forward, hand on his gun belt. Mrs. Thornridge, this isn't a negotiation. The law's been followed to the letter. You don't have a choice here. Everyone has a choice, Sheriff, and ours is to stay. Silas spoke then, his voice carrying that same quiet authority Clara had heard when he'd first confronted her father in the chapel. This land wasn't abandoned. It wasn't unclaimed. I've lived here for 20 years, improved it, paid for supplies from Graymore merchants, contributed to the local economy. I've treated people from your town when their own doctor gave up on them. And now you're telling me that none of that matters, because a man who never set foot on this property has a piece of paper from 1848? One of the well-dressed men spoke up, definitely a lawyer. The law is clear about property ownership, Mr. Thornridge. Occupation doesn't supersede legal title. The law is also clear about fairness and justice, the thin man with the notebook said, scribbling quickly. At least it's supposed to be. Victor's eyes narrowed. Who are you? Daniel Fletcher, Territorial Gazette. Got a very interesting letter about this situation. Fletcher looked around the clearing, taking in the solid cabin, the well-maintained outbuildings, the stacked firewood. This doesn't look like abandoned property to me. It's not abandoned now, Victor said smoothly. But it was when Thornridge started squatting here. My family maintained legal ownership the entire time. Did they? Fletcher looked at his notes. Because according to property records, no Hensley set foot on this land between 1848 and today. Your great-grandfather won it in a card game and forgot about it. Your grandfather never saw it. Your father didn't know it existed until last year, but you expect us to believe you have some moral right to it? I have a legal right to it. That's what matters. Does it? Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Because from where I'm standing, the only reason you want this land is because my husband made it valuable. He did the work. He took the risk. He built something from nothing. And now you want to steal it because you found a dusty old deed in a filing cabinet. I'm not stealing anything. I'm reclaiming family property. You're stealing, Clara repeated. Just like you stole my childhood when Mother died and you convinced Father I was worthless. Just like you stole Father's dignity when you got him drunk and made him sign over the family business. You're a thief, Victor. You always have been. The only difference is now you're using the law to do it. Victor's face flushed red. You watch your mouth, little sister. I could have you arrested for slander. Truth isn't slander. Clara felt something breaking open inside her. Years of fear and shame and silence cracking apart. And I'm not your little sister anymore. I'm not your anything. I stopped being a Hensley the day you and Father sold me like livestock. You came out ahead on that deal, Victor shot back. Got yourself a husband, a home. You should be thanking me. Thanking you? Clara laughed, and it came out sharp and bitter. You want thanks for trafficking your own sister? For using her as payment for debts you helped create? The reporter's pencil scratched faster across his notebook. The deputies shifted uncomfortably. Even Sheriff Dawson looked uncertain. Victor's expression hardened. This is getting us nowhere. Sheriff, execute the eviction. Dawson stepped forward reluctantly. Mr. Thornridge, Mrs. Thornridge, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the cabin. If you resist, I'll have no choice but to arrest you both." Silas raised the rifle slightly, not pointing it at anyone but making its presence clear. "And I'll have no choice but to defend my property." The deputies' hands moved to their guns. The tension ratcheted up immediately, everyone suddenly aware of how quickly this could turn violent. Fletcher stopped writing and looked up sharply. "Gentlemen, I really don't think—" "This is my land," Silas said, his voice deadly calm. "Built by my hands, maintained by my work, earned by my sweat. And I will not walk away from it because some bureaucrat decided an 80-year-old piece of paper matters more than 20 years of labor." "The law," Dawson started. "The law is wrong." Clara moved to stand beside Silas, shoulder to shoulder, and we're not moving. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The clearing was silent, except for the wind in the pines and the nervous shifting of horses. Then Victor laughed, cold and mocking. "This is adorable, really. You two playing house, pretending you have any power here. But the fact is, Clara interrupted, that you need us to leave peacefully. Because if you force us out, if violence happens here today, Mr. Fletcher is going to write about it. And people are going to read about how Victor Hensley used the sheriff's office to evict a healer who's saved lives in Graymore. How he stole land from a man who's done nothing but help people. How he treated his own sister like property. I didn't treat you like—" "You sold me, Victor." Clara's voice cracked but didn't break. "You and Father looked at me and saw a solution to your problems. Not a person, not family, just something you could trade away." The reporter was writing again, his pencil flying across the page. One of the deputies spoke up, a young man Clara vaguely recognized from town. "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "Quiet," Dawson snapped, but he looked troubled, his hand falling away from his gun. Victor saw his advantage slipping and changed tactics. "Fine. You want to make this difficult? We'll make it difficult." He gestured to the lawyer. "Draw up charges of trespassing, destruction of property, theft of resources." "What resources?" Silas asked flatly. "What exactly have I stolen from land your family never wanted and never used?" "Trees, water, game, all property of the Hensley estate." "You can't be serious," Fletcher said, still scribbling. "I'm completely serious. And I'm also filing a complaint with the territorial governor about this situation. About a hermit who's been living illegally on private land and a sheriff who's been too incompetent to remove him." Dawson's face darkened. "Now wait just a minute." "No, you wait." Victor's voice turned sharp. "I've been patient. I've followed the law. I've given them time to pack and leave. And instead of cooperation, I get defiance and slander. So here's what's going to happen. You two have until sundown today to vacate. After that, I'm filing charges, criminal charges. And when you're both sitting in a jail cell, I'll tear down this cabin board by board and sell every piece of lumber." Clara felt Silas tense beside her. His grip on the rifle tightened. This was spiraling. In another minute, someone would do something stupid and people would get hurt. She had to change the game. "I have a better idea," Clara said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "What if we bought the land from you?" Victor blinked. "You don't have that kind of money." "Not today. But what if we had a year? What if you gave us 12 months to raise the funds? And if we can pay you the $2,000 you want, you sign over the deed?" "Why would I do that?" "Because otherwise this gets ugly," Clara gestured to Fletcher. "The newspaper's already here. And Mr. Fletcher looks like the kind of reporter who loves a story about common people standing up to powerful families. Do you really want to be the villain in that story? The man who stole from a healer, who sold his sister and then evicted her?" Victor's jaw worked. He glanced at the reporter, who was watching him with undisguised interest. "1 year is too long," Victor said finally. 6 months. 10 months, Clara countered. "And you stay away from here until then. No more visits, no more threats, no more deputies watching from the trees." "How do I know you won't just disappear?" "Because we'll sign an agreement, witnessed and legal. If we don't have the money in 10 months, you get the land with no further argument. But if we do, you walk away and never bother us again." Victor considered it. Clara could see him weighing the options, the certain violence of today versus the potential profit of waiting, the bad publicity versus the clean transaction. Finally, he nodded. 10 months, $2,000. And if you're even 1 day late, I take everything. Agreed. The lawyer stepped forward, already pulling out papers. I can draw up the contract right now. It'll take about an hour. Do it, Victor said. He turned back to Clara and Silas. You just bought yourself some time. Don't waste it. He remounted his horse and gestured for his men to follow. They rode back toward the tree line, the lawyer staying behind to draft the agreement. Sheriff Dawson lingered, looking between Clara and Silas with something that might have been respect. That was smart thinking, Mrs. Thornridge. Thank you, Sheriff. But you should know, $2,000 in 10 months? That's near impossible, especially up here. I know. Dawson nodded slowly. Well, good luck to you both. He rode after Victor, leaving only the lawyer and the reporter. Fletcher approached, his notebook tucked under his arm. That was quite a performance, Mrs. Thornridge. Mind if I ask you a few questions for my article? Clara glanced at Silas, who nodded. Ask away. Fletcher pulled out his notebook again. How does it feel standing up to your own brother like that? Clara thought about it honestly. Terrifying and liberating, mostly both at once. And you, Mr. Thornridge, you really think you can raise $2,000 in 10 months? Silas's expression was grim. I have no idea, but we're going to try. Fletcher smiled. That's the kind of story people like to read. Common folk fighting against the odds. I'll make sure it's told right. He asked more questions about the cabin, about their life here, about what they plan to do next. Clara answered carefully, aware that every word might end up in print. When Fletcher finally left, promising to send them a copy of the article when it ran, the lawyer finished drafting the agreement. Clara and Silas both signed it, witnessed by the lawyer and dated January 15th. Then they were alone again. Clara walked back to the cabin on legs that felt like water. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving her shaky and exhausted. Silas followed her inside and immediately went to the shelf where he kept his whiskey. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to Clara. Drink. She drank, the burn of the alcohol grounding her. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Silas laughed, a real laugh, startled and disbelieving. I can't believe you did that. Did what? Negotiated. Right there in front of everyone, just changed the entire situation with a few sentences. He shook his head. You were brilliant. Clara felt heat rise to her face. I was desperate. You were brave. There's a difference. Silas set down his glass and turned to face her fully. Where did that come from? That confidence? I don't know. I was watching it fall apart, watching Victor win, and I couldn't stand it. So I opened my mouth, and words came out. Clara laughed shakily. Honestly, I'm a little surprised it worked. It worked because you made him look bad, made him realize that forcing us out would cost him more than giving us a chance. Silas stepped closer. That was the smartest thing either of us could have done. It bought us time. But Silas, $2,000. How are we possibly going to? I don't know. But we have 10 months to figure it out. He reached out and took her hand. We'll find a way. Together. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. The fear was still there, the uncertainty about whether they could actually pull this off. But there was something else too. Hope. Real tangible hope that they might actually win this. Together, she agreed. That night, they sat by the fire planning. Silas could sell his services as a healer more actively, travel to neighboring towns. Clara could take her plant knowledge and start preparing medicines to sell at the trading post. They could trap more, sell furs, maybe hire themselves out for seasonal work. It would mean months of brutal effort, months of saving every penny and working themselves to exhaustion. But it was possible, maybe barely, but possible. Around midnight, Clara stood to climb up to the loft. But before she could, Silas caught her hand. Clara, thank you. For today. For all of it. She looked down at him, at this man who'd bought her freedom and then given it back piece by piece. This man who'd taught her to be strong and never made her feel weak for learning. You don't need to thank me. This is my home too. Our home. I know. But I wanted to say it anyway. He stood, still holding her hand. I don't know what happens next. Don't know if we'll succeed or fail. But I want you to know that having you here, fighting beside me, it means everything. Clara's breath caught. They were standing close again like they had that morning, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the worry he was trying to hide, close enough to kiss him, if she was brave enough. She wasn't. Not yet. Instead, she squeezed his hand and said, "It means everything to me, too." Then she climbed up to the loft and lay in the darkness, her heart pounding and her mind racing. They'd won today. Barely, but they'd won. Now they just had to keep winning for 10 more months. Clara closed her eyes and tried to believe it was possible. Somewhere below, she heard Silas moving around, settling in for another night of restless sleep and worried planning. 10 months, she thought. We can do this. We have to. Because the alternative, losing this place, losing each other, was unthinkable. Clara pulled the blankets tight and whispered to the darkness, to herself, to whatever force might be listening. We can do this. And for the first time since Victor had appeared in their clearing, she actually believed it. The article ran 3 days later. Hutchins brought it up from the trading post, riding through fresh snow to deliver a copy personally. He found Clara outside, checking the trap lines, and he handed her the folded newspaper with a grin that showed his missing front tooth. "You two are famous," he said. Clara unfolded the paper with cold, numbed fingers. The headline stretched across the top of page 3 in bold type. "Mountain Healer Fights for Home Against Powerful Family's Land Claim." She read it standing there in the snow, her breath steaming in the cold air. Fletcher had written it exactly as she'd hoped. No embellishment needed, just the facts laid out plainly. A man who'd built a life from nothing. A woman sold to settle debts. A brother using the law to steal what he'd never earned. And at the end, a question. Is this what justice looks like in our territory? "People are talking about it all over Graymore," Hutchins said. "Some folks are saying your brother's getting what he deserves. Others are saying the law's the law, and Silas should have filed proper claims years ago. But everyone's talking." Clara looked up from the paper. "Is that good or bad?" "Depends on what you're trying to do. If you want money, it's very good. I've already had 3 people ask me how they can help. One woman, Mrs. Peterson, runs the bakery. She wants to buy medicine from you regular. Says she'd rather give her money to someone honest than to that snake oil salesman who comes through twice a year." Something warm unfurled in Clara's chest. "Really? Really? And she's not the only one." Hutchins shifted in his saddle. "Word of advice, though? Strike while the iron's hot. Victor's going to try to control this story, make himself look better. The sooner you start selling, the sooner people can put their money where their sympathy is." Clara folded the paper carefully. "Thank you, Hutchins, for bringing this up, for everything. Just doing what's right." He tipped his hat. "You two need anything, you let me know. I got a feeling you're going to make it through this." After he left, Clara ran back to the cabin, clutching the newspaper. Silas was inside grinding herbs for a cough remedy. He looked up when she burst through the door, and she thrust the paper at him. "Read this." He did, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set it down carefully on the table. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose that's that." "That's that? Silas, this is good. People are talking. People want to help. Or people feel sorry for us, which isn't the same thing." But there was something in his eyes that contradicted his words. Something that looked almost like hope. Clara pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Hutchins says Mrs. Peterson wants to buy medicine from us. Regular orders, and there are others." "How many others?" He didn't say exactly, but enough that he thought it was worth mentioning. Clara leaned forward. "This could work. If we can get regular customers, if we can build a real business, it's still a long way to $2,000. I know, but it's a start." Clara reached across the table and took his hand. "We're going to do this. We're going to find a way." Silas looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. "When did you get so stubborn?" "I learned from the best." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he squeezed her hand and stood. "All right. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Come on, I'm going to teach you everything I know about preparing medicines for sale. If people are going to pay for our work, they're going to get the best we can offer." They worked through the rest of January and into February like people possessed. Clara learned to prepare tinctures and salves to exact specifications, to measure and mix and bottle with precision that would satisfy paying customers. Silas taught her which remedies sold best, which were worth the effort, and which weren't. Every week, Clara made the trek down to the trading post with a pack full of carefully labeled bottles and jars. Mrs. Peterson bought her cough remedy and stomach tonic. The blacksmith bought liniment for sore muscles. A farmer bought salve for his wife's arthritis. Small sales. But they added up. By the end of February, they had $83 saved. It wasn't enough. Wasn't even close to enough. But it was progress. And progress felt like oxygen after months of suffocating. The work was brutal. Clara would spend all day preparing medicines, then all evening checking trap lines and preserving whatever meat they caught. Silas worked even harder, taking jobs in neighboring towns, setting broken bones, treating fevers, delivering babies when the local midwife was overwhelmed. They barely saw each other some weeks. Ships passing in the night, leaving notes about what needed doing and what supplies were running low. It couldn't last. Clara knew that. The human body wasn't meant to run on 4 hours of sleep and constant motion, but they kept pushing anyway, because what choice did they have? March brought the thaw, and with it, new opportunities. The melting snow exposed early spring plants, wild garlic, chickweed, dandelion greens. Clara harvested everything she could find, drying some for medicine and eating the rest to save money on supplies. Silas started offering his services to the lumber camps that sprang up in the foothills. Dangerous work. Men got injured all the time cutting trees and hauling logs. But it paid well, and the camp bosses were happy to have a competent healer on hand. By the end of March, they had $240 saved. Still not enough. Not even close. Clara tried not to think about the math, about how they'd need to more than triple their savings in the next 6 months. Tried not to think about what would happen if they failed. But late at night, lying in the loft and listening to Silas work below, the fear would creep in. They were killing themselves for something that might be impossible, running themselves into the ground chasing a goal they might never reach. And for what? A piece of land that legally belonged to someone else anyway? But then morning would come, and Clara would climb down to find Silas making breakfast, his hands steady despite exhaustion, his eyes determined despite doubt. And she'd remember why they were doing this, not for the land itself, for what it represented, the right to build something and keep it, the right to earn respect through work instead of birth, the right to say no to people who thought they owned you, the right to be free. So she kept working, kept pushing, kept believing that somehow, impossibly, they'd find a way. April brought the first real test of that belief. Clara was at the trading post delivering her weekly order when she overheard 2 men talking near the feed bins. "Heard Hensley's raising the price," one said. "On what?" "On that land deal with Thornridge. Says 2,000 ain't enough anymore. Wants 2,500 now." Clara's blood went cold. She turned to face them. "What did you just say?" The men looked startled to see her there. The first one, a scruffy prospector named Jenkins, shifted uncomfortably. "Sorry, ma'am. Didn't mean for you to hear that." "Is it true? Is Victor changing the terms?" "That's what I heard. He was in town yesterday talking to the sheriff. Said the contract didn't specify that he couldn't adjust the price to account for, market conditions or some such." The other man snorted. "Market conditions. That's a nice way of saying he's a greedy bastard who can't stand seeing his sister get ahead." Clara's hands were shaking. She set down her basket before she dropped it. "The contract was signed, witnessed. He can't just... He's saying he can. And if you don't like it, you can take it up with Judge Morrison." Jenkins shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thornridge. Your brother's a piece of work." Clara barely remembered the walk back to the cabin. Her mind was racing, cycling through anger and fear and despair. $2,500. They'd been scraping and saving and working themselves to the bone for 2,000, and now Victor was moving the target. Of course he was, because that's what people like Victor did. They changed the rules whenever it looked like they might lose. She found Silas in the lean-to, checking on one of the horses who'd gone lame. He took one look at her face and straightened immediately. "What happened?" Clara told him. All of it. The conversation at the trading post, Victor's new demand, the casual cruelty of raising the price when they were already struggling. When she finished, Silas was very quiet. Too quiet. Then he kicked the nearest support post hard enough to make the whole structure shake. "That son of a..." He cut himself off, breathing hard. "He can't do this. The contract was clear. $2,000, 10 months. We had an agreement." Apparently agreements don't mean much to Victor. Then we fight it. We go to the judge, we show him the contract. The judge is Victor's friend, Silas. You know that. He's not going to rule against a Hensley for the likes of us. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Victor's going to win. He's always going to win because people like him make the rules. Silas crossed to her and gripped her shoulders. Listen to me. We are not giving up. You hear me? We've come too far. Worked too hard. If Victor wants to change the terms, let him. We'll find the extra 500 somehow. How? We're barely on track to make 2,000. Where are we supposed to find another $500 in 6 months? I don't know, but we'll figure it out. We always do. His grip tightened. Clara, look at me. She did, reluctantly. We're going to win this. Not because the system is fair. It's not. Not because people like your brother follow the rules. They don't. We're going to win because we refuse to quit. Because we're stubborn and mean and too damn tired to give up now. Clara let out a laugh that was half sob. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan we've got. She leaned forward until her forehead rested against his chest, and his arms came around her immediately. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other up against the weight of an impossible task. I hate him, Clara whispered. I hate that he still has this power over me, over us. Then let's take it away from him. Silas pulled back to look at her. Let's make so much money he can't move the target fast enough. Let's win so completely that he has to sign over that deed with the whole town watching. Clara searched his face, looking for doubt, for fear. She found only determination. All right, she said. Then let's do it. They went after the money like hunters after prey. Relentless, focused, willing to do whatever it took. Clara started teaching basic herbalism at the trading post. Simple classes where she'd show people how to identify and prepare common remedies. She charged 50 cents per person, and to her shock, 8 people showed up to the first class. By the third class, she had 15. Silas took on more dangerous work. A mine operation in the next valley needed someone to treat injuries, and he spent 3 weeks there in May, coming back exhausted and covered in rock dust, but with $120 in his pocket. They sold everything they didn't absolutely need. Extra furs, spare tools, the good winter coat Silas had been saving. Every penny went into the jar they kept hidden under a loose floorboard. By the end of May, they had $630. Not enough. Still not enough. But they kept going. June brought a heat wave that made the cabin feel like an oven and turned the forest tinder dry. Fire risk was high, which meant the logging camp shut down early. No camps meant no work for Silas, which meant less income right when they needed it most. Clara tried not to panic, tried to focus on what she could control, her classes, her medicine sales, the vegetables she was growing behind the cabin. But the math was getting harder to ignore. They had 4 months left and still needed almost $2,000. Even working themselves to death, it might not be enough. She was pulling weeds in the garden one afternoon, her back screaming and her hands raw, when she heard horses approaching. Not again, she thought. Please, not Victor again. But when she looked up, it wasn't Victor. It was Daniel Fletcher, the reporter. And he wasn't alone. 3 other men rode with him, well-dressed and serious-looking. They dismounted in the clearing, and Fletcher approached with his hand extended. Mrs. Thornridge, sorry to arrive unannounced. Is your husband here? He's checking the trap lines. He'll be back soon. Clara wiped dirt from her hands. What's this about? These gentlemen would like to speak with you both. They came all the way from the territorial capital. One of the men stepped forward, an older gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes. Mrs. Thornridge, my name is James Whitmore. I'm a lawyer representing the Territorial Land Reform Commission. We read Mr. Fletcher's article about your situation, and it raised some interesting legal questions. Clara's heart started to pound. What kind of questions? The kind about whether land claims based on inactive deeds should supersede occupancy and improvement rights. It's a gray area in our current territorial law, but there's growing sentiment that it shouldn't be. Whitmore pulled out a folder. We've been looking into your brother's claim, and we found some irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The kind where taxes weren't actually paid on the property between 1867 and 1891. There's a gap in the records, which means the land may have reverted to territorial ownership during that period. Whitmore's smile was slight but significant. Which means your brother's claim might not be as solid as he thinks. Clara felt dizzy. Are you saying? I'm saying we'd like to file a challenge to the eviction order on your behalf, free of charge. The commission is very interested in establishing precedent for cases like yours. Silas chose that moment to emerge from the tree line, a brace of rabbits over his shoulder. He stopped short when he saw the visitors, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. Clara ran to him. "Silas, you need to hear this." She introduced him to Whitmore and the others, then let the lawyer explain again. She watched Silas's face as he listened, saw the cautious hope that started to build. "And you do this for free?" Silas asked when Whitmore finished. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just a belief that the law should protect people who work and build, not just people who inherit." Whitmore extended his hand. "What do you say, Mr. Thornridge? Will you let us help you fight this?" Silas looked at Clara. She nodded. "All right," Silas said, shaking Whitmore's hand. "Let's fight." The legal process moved slower than molasses in winter, but it moved. Whitmore filed motions and briefs challenging the validity of Victor's claim. The case was assigned to a different judge, not Morrison, who'd recused himself after questions were raised about his relationship with the Hensley family. Victor, predictably, fought back. He hired expensive lawyers from the Capitol, men who filed counter motions and demanded hearings. But something had shifted. The newspaper coverage had made Clara and Silas sympathetic figures, and the Land Reform Commission's involvement gave them legitimacy. People started asking uncomfortable questions about families who'd held land for generations without using it, about whether that was fair or just legal. Meanwhile, Clara and Silas kept working, because regardless of what the courts decided, they still needed money. Still needed to prove they could make the payment if it came to that. By the end of July, they had $940. By the end of August, $1,200. September came with cool nights and the first hints of autumn color. Clara's classes had grown to 20 people, and she'd started offering private consultations for more complex health issues. Silas had taken on 3 apprentices, young people from Graymore who wanted to learn healing but couldn't afford medical school. They charged the apprentices a small fee and got help with preparing medicines in return. It wasn't much, but it added up. By the end of September, they had $1,600. They were going to make it. Against all odds, through sheer stubborn determination, they were actually going to make it. The hearing was scheduled for October 20th. Clara and Silas rode down to Graymore the day before, their savings hidden in a money belt under Silas's shirt. Whitmore met them at the courthouse steps. "I won't lie to you. This could go either way. Your brother's lawyers are good, and they're arguing that gaps in tax records don't invalidate inheritance. But we've got a strong case, and the new judge seems inclined toward fairness." "What do we need to do?" Clara asked. "Just tell the truth. Tell them about the work you've done, the life you've built. Let them see that you're not squatters or opportunists. You're people who've earned the right to be here." The courtroom was packed. Clara recognized faces from Graymore, Mrs. Peterson from the bakery, Hutchins from the trading post, even Agnes from the land records office. People who'd watched her grow up, watched her get sold, and now were here to watch her fight back. Victor sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyers, looking confident and expensive. He caught Clara's eye and smiled, that same cruel smile from childhood. But Clara didn't look away, didn't flinch. She'd spent too long being afraid of him. Judge Harrison called the court to order and reviewed the case. Then he called Victor's lawyers to present their argument. They were good, Clara had to admit. They talked about property rights and legal precedent, about how society would collapse if people could just take land that didn't belong to them. They made Silas sound like a criminal and Clara like a naive girl who'd been taken advantage of. It made her blood boil, but Whitmore just took notes and waited. Then it was their turn. Whitmore called Silas to the stand first, asked him about how he'd come to live on the land, about the cabin he'd built, the people he'd healed, the life he'd created. Silas answered simply, honestly. No embellishment, just facts. Then Whitmore called Clara. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs and swore to tell the truth. "Mrs. Thornridge," Whitmore began, "can you describe your relationship with your brother?" Clara took a breath. "Victor has spent most of his life trying to control me. When our mother died, he convinced our father I was worthless. When I grew up, he used me as collateral for debts. And when I finally found a place where I could be myself, where I could be valued, he tried to take that away too." "Objection," Victor's lawyer stood. "The witness is editorializing." "Overruled," Judge Harrison said. "She's answering the question. Continue, Mrs. Thornridge." Clara looked at Victor sitting there in his expensive suit, expecting to win like he always won, and she decided to stop holding back. "My brother sees people as things to be used. My father was a thing that provided money until he drank it all away. I was a thing that could be sold to settle debts. And that land he never saw, never cared about, never even knew existed until he thought he could profit from it. That's just another thing to be exploited. Clara's voice grew stronger. But I'm not a thing anymore, and neither is my husband. We're people who've built a life through work and skill and determination. And we're asking this court to recognize that labor and improvement should mean something, that being human should mean something. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Harrison looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Victor. Mr. Hensley, I'd like to ask you a question directly. Have you ever set foot on the land in question? Victor stood slowly. No, Your Honor, but that doesn't change my legal ownership. I'm aware of what it does and doesn't change legally. I'm asking from a moral standpoint. You inherited land you never saw, never used, never cared about. And now you want to evict people who've lived there for 20 years because you found out it has value. Is that correct? Victor's jaw tightened. I'm exercising my legal rights. That wasn't my question. The tension stretched. Finally, Victor said, yes, that's correct. Harrison nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. I'll take this matter under advisement and issue my ruling within the week. Court adjourned. Clara and Silas filed out with everyone else, Whitmore trailing behind. How do you think it went? Silas asked quietly. Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. Whitmore straightened his papers. Harrison's a fair man, but he's also bound by law. It really could go either way. The week that followed was the longest of Clara's life. They stayed in Graymoor, in a boarding house that charged too much, but was better than riding back and forth to the cabin every day. Clara couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Just paced and worried and tried not to think about what would happen if they lost. Silas wasn't much better. He sat in their room reading the same medical journal over and over, not retaining a single word. Finally, on October 27th, a messenger came to the boarding house. The judge had reached his decision. They walked to the courthouse through cold autumn rain. The courtroom was packed again. Somehow word had spread that the ruling was coming today. Clara sat beside Silas, their hands clasped tight under the table. Judge Harrison entered, and everyone rose. Be seated, he said, his voice grave. He arranged his papers carefully, and Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought she might pass out. I've reviewed all the evidence and arguments in this case, Harrison began, and I've struggled with this decision more than any I've made in 20 years on the bench. Oh no, Clara thought. He's going to rule against us. On one hand, the law is clear about property rights and inheritance. Mr. Hensley does possess a deed to the land in question. On the other hand, there are significant gaps in the tax record that raise questions about whether that deed remained valid through periods of non-payment. Harrison looked up, his eyes moving between Victor's table and theirs. Furthermore, I cannot ignore the testimony about improvement in occupancy. Mr. Thornridge has lived on and substantially improved the property for 2 decades. He's created value where none existed. And the plaintiff admitted under oath that he never cared about this land until it became profitable. Victor's lawyer started to rise, but Harrison held up a hand. I'm not finished. After careful consideration, I'm ruling that the tax payment gaps from 1867 to 1891 did indeed cause the land to revert to territorial ownership, which means Mr. Hensley's inherited claim is invalid. Clara's breath caught. Beside her, Silas went very still. However, Harrison continued, that doesn't automatically grant ownership to Mr. Thornridge either. What I'm ruling instead is this. The land is to be sold at public auction, with both parties allowed to bid. Given Mr. Thornridge's 20 years of occupancy and improvement, he will be granted first right of refusal at whatever the winning bid amount is. The courtroom erupted. Victor's lawyers were on their feet, objecting loudly. Whitmore was scribbling notes, his expression focused. Clara turned to Silas. What does that mean? It means we have to buy the land like everyone else. But if someone outbids us, we can match their bid and win anyway. Silas's voice was tight. It means we still need the money. Harrison banged his gavel. Order, I'm not finished. The auction will be held in 30 days, November 27th. Minimum bid is set at $1,000. And gentlemen, he looked pointedly at Victor's lawyers, I'd advise against filing frivolous appeals. This ruling is final. He banged the gavel again and stood. It was over. Not the way they'd hoped, not with outright ownership, but not a complete loss either. They had 30 days to come up with enough money to win at auction, and they had $1,600 already saved. They could do this. Outside the courthouse, Whitmore caught up with them. That was the best outcome we could have hoped for, given the circumstances. Harrison found a middle ground that respects both property law and occupancy rights. Will Victor bid against us? Clara asked. Almost certainly, but he'll have to do it publicly, which means everyone will know he's trying to steal land from people who've earned it. That might limit how high he's willing to go. Whitmore shook their hands. Good luck, and if you need anything in the next 30 days, you let me know. Clara and Silas rode back to the cabin that night, exhaustion and relief and nervous energy all mixing together. We're going to make it, Clara said, more to herself than to Silas. We have 1,600 saved. We can win this. Unless Victor bids higher. Then we'll match him. That's what first right of refusal means. And if he bids 3,000, 5,000, how high are we willing to go? Clara didn't have an answer for that. They spent the next 30 days in a frenzy of final preparations. Clara taught extra classes, took on more consultations, sold every remedy she could make. Silas took a dangerous job helping repair a collapsed mine shaft, coming back with $200 and a gash on his arm that Clara had to stitch closed. By November 20th, they had $2,100. By November 25th, $2,250. It would have to be enough. The auction was held at noon on November 27th in the town square. Despite the cold, a huge crowd gathered. People wanted to see how this story ended. The auctioneer, a bored-looking man named Simmons, stood on a temporary platform with the land deed in his hand. We're auctioning 160 acres of mountain land in the Northern Territory. Improvements include one cabin, one lean-to, one well, and various outbuildings. Minimum bid is $1,000. Do I hear 1,000? Silas raised his hand. 1,000. I have 1,000. Do I hear 1,100? Victor, standing across the square with his lawyers, raised his hand. 1,100, the crowd murmured. 1,200, Silas called. 1,300, Victor countered immediately. Back and forth it went, climbing higher. 1,400, 15, 16. At 1,700, Clara felt her stomach drop. They only had $2,250. If Victor pushed it much higher, even with first right of refusal, they'd be in trouble. 1,800, Victor called, a smile playing at his lips. 1,900, Silas said, his voice steady despite the tension Clara could feel radiating from him. 2,000, Victor shot back. The crowd was fully engaged now, watching like this was a sporting event. 2,100, Silas said. Victor hesitated. 2,100 was more than he'd originally asked for, more than the land was probably worth to him, given the public scrutiny. But pride was a powerful thing. 2,200, Victor said. Clara's heart sank. They had 2,250, which meant they could still match. But barely. Silas glanced at her. She nodded. 2,300, Silas called. The crowd gasped. Victor's expression darkened. 2,400, Victor snarled. They didn't have it. Clara's mind raced. They were $50 short, and first right of refusal didn't help if they couldn't actually pay. Then a voice called from the crowd. I'll loan them the difference. Everyone turned. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, her face set with determination. I'll loan Mr. and Mrs. Thornridge $150 at no interest. They've done right by this community. Time we did right by them. I'll add 50, Hutchins called out. And I'll add 20, someone else shouted. Within minutes, 6 different people had pledged money, more than enough to cover the gap. Victor's face went red. This is highly irregular. This is community support, Judge Harrison said from the edge of the crowd. He'd come to watch the auction personally. And I see no legal reason why Mr. Thornridge can't accept loans to meet his bid. Proceed, Mr. Simmons. The auctioneer looked between Victor and Silas. Do I hear 2,500? Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. The whole town was watching. If he kept bidding, he'd look like exactly what Clara had called him, a greedy man trying to steal from people who'd earned their place. No, Victor said finally, his voice tight with rage. No further bids. 2,400 going once, Simmons called. Going twice. Sold. To Silas Thornridge for $2,400 pending verification of funds. The crowd erupted in cheers. Clara threw her arms around Silas, and he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around despite the crowd watching. When he set her down, she was laughing and crying at the same time. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, through sheer determination and the help of good people, they'd actually done it. They spent the next hour collecting the loaned money and counting out the full amount for Simmons. Mrs. Peterson waved off Clara's attempts to discuss repayment terms. "Pay me back when you can. No rush. Just keep making that cough syrup. My grandson swears by it." Hutchins said the same thing. And the others. These people weren't helping because they expected anything back. They were helping because it was the right thing to do. Victor left without a word, his lawyers trailing behind him. Clara watched him go and felt nothing but pity. He'd lost because he'd never understood that people mattered more than property, that relationships mattered more than rules. He'd had power, money, the law on his side, and he'd still lost, because in the end, he'd been alone. The deed was transferred that afternoon in Judge Harrison's office. Silas signed his name carefully, and Clara signed beside him. Mrs. Silas Thornridge, in clear, confident letters. When they walked out of that office, they owned the land. Legally, officially, indisputably. It was theirs. The ride back to the cabin was quiet. Both of them were too exhausted, too emotionally wrung out to talk much. But they held hands the whole way, and that said everything that needed saying. When they reached the clearing, Silas helped Clara down from the wagon, and they stood there for a moment, looking at the cabin that was finally, truly home. "We did it," Clara said softly. "We did it," Silas agreed. They went inside, and for the first time in months, they didn't immediately start working on the next task, the next problem, the next crisis. They just sat by the fire, warm and safe, and home. Eventually, Silas spoke. "I need to say something." Clara looked at him. "What?" "When I brought you here, I told you this wasn't a real marriage, that you were just someone I needed to keep the town from bothering me." He turned to face her fully. That was true at the time, but it's not true anymore. Clara's heart started to pound. "Somewhere along the way," Silas continued, his voice rough, "you became the most important person in my life. Not because of any agreement or contract, but because of who you are. You're brave and stubborn, and stronger than anyone I've ever met, and I—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I love you, Clara. I think I have for a while now. I just didn't know how to say it." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "You stubborn, ridiculous man. I've loved you since you taught me to carry water without spilling it. Since you believed I could be strong when I didn't believe it myself." Silas cupped her face in his hands. "I want this to be real. All of it. Not a transaction or an arrangement. A real marriage. A real partnership. You and me, choosing each other every day." "Yes," Clara whispered. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the perfunctory ceremony in the chapel all those months ago. This was real and raw and full of everything they'd been too afraid to say before. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer you, just this cabin and a life that's going to be hard more often than it's easy." Clara laughed. "Silas, I didn't come here looking for easy. I came here looking for real, and that's exactly what I found." Winter came early that year, blanketing the mountains in snow by mid-December. But inside the cabin, Clara and Silas were warm. They paid back their loans by spring, every penny accounted for. Mrs. Peterson's first, because she'd been first to step forward. The medicine business grew. Clara's classes expanded. Silas took on more apprentices, teaching the next generation of healers. They built a life that was theirs in every sense of the word. Hard work, yes. Long days and short nights and constant challenges. But also laughter and partnership and the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from building something real. Years later, when people asked Clara about her life, she always told them the same thing. She'd been sold at an altar like property, traded for debts she didn't owe. She'd married a stranger and followed him into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back. And it had been the best thing that ever happened to her. Not because it was easy, not because it was romantic or simple or destined, but because she'd learned something essential in that cabin in the mountains. She'd learned that freedom isn't given. It's taken, claimed, fought for with everything you have. She'd learned that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. She'd learned that family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who stand beside you when everything falls apart. And most importantly, she'd learned that you don't need to be born valuable to be worth something. You just need to decide you matter and then prove it through your actions every single day. Clara Hensley had been nobody in Graymore, a girl sold to settle debts, but Clara Thornridge was someone. A healer, a teacher, a partner, a fighter. Someone who'd taken a life that started as a transaction and turned it into something true. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Not the land they'd fought for, though they'd earned every inch of it. Not the money they'd scraped together, though it had bought their freedom. But the choice they'd made, over and over, to be more than what other people said they were. To be free, to be valued, to be seen, to be human. That was the real victory, and it was theirs forever.